switch our attention to security, which is something that has been in the news for quite a while now, especially what's been happening, the latest figures coming on from Southern Kaduna. We also understand that overnight, some between 20 and 33 people have been killed, depending on which place you are getting your source from. To discuss this, we have Reverend Ladi Thompson with us, who is a strategic security researcher and consultant. He joins us from our studios in Abuja. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. You must be concerned about all of this that is happening, but looking at all of these, what are those things that we are missing?
Well, thank you very much. I do think anybody would be concerned because of the amount of bloodshed that has gone on. Now, first of all, I think what we need to establish is that we have to be very careful at this point in time not to come together again till we come to the point of analysis paralysis. I've been here with you, over the years, and we have granulated many issues about this peculiar challenge. And I think the point right now is that we don't need to repeat any things that we have said before. We must now take a fresh and practical look at this situation and make very decisive, we have to make decisions that definitely will help us. Now, like I said, to avoid analysis paralysis, we don't need to go back again. Over the past 10, 15 years, I've been here explaining that unless you diagnose a problem properly, there's no possibility that your prescription will work. So in a sense, over the past 20 years or thereabouts, I'm not very sure that Nigeria took out time to diagnose exactly what the challenge is. Because if we look at these things from the perspective of a proper diagnosis, what is happening till right now and all that is still part of the expected narrative. But one of the hopes that I have, which I think points in the right direction for me, is the fact that the president of the country openly called his service chiefs and said there needs to be a total overhaul of strategy. Now, the questions that matter to me is this. Number one, do we have what it takes in Nigeria to handle this problem? If the answer is yes, that we have what it takes to handle this problem, the second question there is, why has this solution eluded us? Now, if we're able to granulate that, it definitely will reflect. I was taking a look at the National Security Strategy document that was upgraded in 2019. Very robust document. But in the light of what has continued to happen, I looked at a few of the chapters on terrorism, and then I began to see the fact that we actually need now to come to accept that what we are dealing with has both a global, regional, and local portent. We need to agree, according to the diagnosis that we have been supplying through the years, that we are dealing with a hydra, and the fact that it also uses force multipliers. From what we've said through the years, and I've never changed my mind about this, after studying this about 10, 15 years ago, gradually, if you remember very well, I brought up the word concatenation, which was the fact that if you're going to beat this thing, you must be ready to join dots that other people cannot see. Now,
Reverend Thompson, just one moment, Reverend Thompson. Reverend Thompson, just one moment to take one or two messages. There are so many things you've said already that we need to expatiate a little more on. Stay with us.
Welcome back. Well, Reverend Thompson, you spoke about the dots that we need to connect. Could you tell us about them?
Well, it's very simple. Like I said to you, when you have a problem that is complex, a problem that has different portents to it, I'm talking about the fact that you have a global, portent, you have the regional from the West African coast, and then you have the national, and then even local issues. Now, when you have that kind of challenge, oftentimes one of the biggest problems is even diagnosing what the real problem is. Let me simplify it by saying Let's look at this COVID-19 thing, for instance. Now, if we were not getting accurate help for diagnosis, a lot of what people would have been saying is that, oh, this person has pneumonia, this one has, heart trouble and all sorts of complications. And nobody will be able to pinpoint the fact that if you join all those dots one by one, the results points to COVID-19. So that's what concatenation really is. It's a pattern that is there, difficult to see. And that's the reason why, whether we like it or not, for many years in Nigeria, we were living in denial, even though we had already had the, global terrorism problem within our borders and boundaries.
What is your impression about, because speaking about diagnosis, of course, many would like to see us get it right in that regard. But you do remember that some time ago, the West, they spoke loudly saying they could help Nigeria, they could provide intel, not necessarily putting boots on the ground. And so many people had their hopes up. Former French president was in the country, they had that meeting, and many thought we were going to kick on from there. And then here we are. What do you think went wrong at that point?
Well, I don't know that something went wrong. What I'd like to say is that we are learning. You see, first of all, there's no nation of the world that's going to conquer this problem without considering the fact that you must not cede certain parts of your sovereignty to whoever is assisting you. For example, I'll give you a good example quickly. Go and granulate the definition of terrorism in France, the official definition, and go check what the official definition is in America, check what it is in Saudi Arabia. You're going to discover that practically all nations of the world have had to define this problem from their own perspective. So the truth is that when France wants to offer you help, or the United States of America wants to offer you help, they're going to offer you help with the primary interest of their own nations first, which will only help you up to a peculiar point. And then don't forget that as long as we gloss over the local challenges that we have, these people, no matter how benevolent any country is, there is a limit to the amount of help that can be rendered. So when it came, I'm sure there were a lot of military aid that came in, operations, training programs and all that. But is it that in Nigeria, we need to come to understand that there's only, all that can only go so far. This is a problem that primarily we have to take responsibility for ourselves. We can't outsource the solution.
Identify the challenge, which is defining terrorism in the context of Nigeria. How well have we performed in that context? Because, you said different countries have their definitions. What is it for Nigeria?
Well, like I said, one of the things I want to avoid is analysis paralysis. And more so if I put myself in the position of a mother who has just lost a son, or a breadwinner who has been hacked to death by things that continue. So I think what we need to focus on to avoid analysis paralysis is the fact that there are 4 basics that every country must put into place, if it's going to beat this thing. And if you go back over the past 10 years, I've kept saying to you that there are these 4 things that have to be in place. Now, the military aspects, the kinetics, boots on ground and all the training, no matter what we do, maximum it is 17 to maybe 30% of the solution. Because the kind of threat we're dealing with is a hydra. And because of that, you find out that Nigeria has tried. Let's be very frank, because I was thinking to myself that even the military chiefs, when they sit down and get together, they're probably going to have to come back to Mr. President to let Mr. President know that, look, Mr. President, when it comes to the military aspect, our boys are trying, our people are trying. We have spoken so much about asymmetrical warfare. We have spoken so much about hybrid threats. We've spoken so much about breaking the chain of traditional command. We have spoken so much about interagency cooperation, regional cooperation, and all these things which are done all over the world. But no matter how much of that you do, and you neglect the other things that have to be done, it will be tantamount to wasting the lives of young soldiers and our operatives against this threat.
What are those things? As much as you say we like to avoid, analysis, paralysis, but we have to talk about this issue. So, what are those things really that are being neglected?
Okay, well, I just think that the upgrade, like I said, all eyes in Nigeria right now, since the president has given marching orders and the service chiefs are putting their heads together, speedily, all eyes should be on the upgrade of the National Security Strategy document. I think the last one was in 2019. I was looking at it. So I think the focus now should be on that. And when I was going through it, let me be very practical. There are 3 other things apart from the military aspect that I think we have to now, some of them are already in that document, but they have to be emphasized more and granulated for us to have plans. Number 1, we have already spoken about the military. So number 2, we must remember that the architecture of thought of this peculiar threat is different. What does that mean? It means that we must get into the heads of the enemy. Remember that the greater enemy uses the lesser problems. The greater enemy studies Nigeria, studies enmities. Look at Southern Kaduna, for instance. You will think that all that is going on in Southern Kaduna is just local. No, there are portents of it that are local: sponsorship, regional sponsorship, global. And you see, you need a consensus builder. If that problem in Kaduna is going to be solved, we have to recognize the fact that there are certain traditional splits that have always been. And what we need right now in Kaduna, beyond the military aspect, is that we need a seasoned statesman beyond maybe a non-state actor or a group of non-state actors who know African style, how to appeal to people on a one-on-one and actually help us to build consensus and close the gaps that are being exploited. So I said architecture of thought because you have to be ready to think this thing through. As long as the enemy keeps outthinking us, we're not really going to make a headway. And that's number 2. Now for number 3, we must remember that conveniently for all these things, there is an ideology that is being sponsored. And it's a combination not only of just a philosophy, but it also ropes in a religion. Now, that's very clever because it makes it a lot more dangerous. We also need right now to realize that in Nigeria, we have to have a Nigerian ideology that is much stronger than any ideology that it can use to try and divide us. And even though religion is a very sensitive issue, I believe that Nigeria has what it takes in terms of wisdom, the capacity, and people who can sit down and structure something for us that protects, watch this, the mind of the average Nigerian and strengthens us against, the radicalism process that is well thought out. Now, the last one is what we call narratives. You see, the narrative, the ideology protects your mind, but the narrative is what bonds all of us together. We really have to, at this time, pay attention to the Nigerian narrative. You see, my challenge right now is that people die in Chibok. There's some attacks going on. The attacks are going on in southern Kaduna right now and all that. For a few days, somebody shouts over breakfast in Lagos and says, look at what has happened. I don't like this. And all of a sudden, instead of us all coming together and feeling the pain together, you find out that all sorts of conspiracy theories are springing up left, right, and center. The only way we can handle that is to have narratives. We have to create our own proper narratives, national narratives that, enhance the bonding to such a degree that everybody is ready to stand for the unity, the future, the peace, and the progress of this country. As long as those narratives are still not injected into this picture, a lot of confusion is going on. And as we speak right now, there are a lot of people who are good-minded, good-hearted, who would like to do something, but who are not necessarily well informed. And at the end of the day, even their good intentions, in some cases, are going to make matters worse. Mark what I'm saying. So this responsibility is something that we cannot shirk at all, and it has to come from the federal government level. First of all, giving guidelines, non-state actors to be a part of the process.
Now, that confusion pervades a lot because, I mean, so many people who we've spoken to, even off the camera, are equally dumbfounded at all of what is going on. But as our security architecture is presently constituted, can we achieve much?
Well, I did say to you that what matters to me the most is that does Nigeria have what it takes to handle this issue? And the answer to me is a resounding yes. So what I would rather look at, in terms of this is that we need to come to a place where we ask the right questions. And what you have asked is one of the right questions. But in asking that questions, it must be towards an objective. I have already said to you that there are 4 things that have to be in place. And frankly speaking, if we carry out studies, you check anywhere in the world, look over this issue, you will find out that there may be more, but without those 4 basics, we will not win this war on the long run. So I believe that we have what it takes, and if the media continues to ask the right questions and continues to probe and push, we definitely will get to a point where the security, the architecture of our security will be just right. And by the way, if it was perfect, the president would not have spoken up, spoken to the NSA and to the service chiefs to make sure that they upgrade it.
Well, one of the things that concerns a number of people is what you said the other time about our local, the local solutions that we're providing for it. Are those ones, what you talked about in those 4 elements, are those the local interventions that you said we have been sidestepping, or there are others?
I think you have a point there, but I think the major issue is this, is that some of the local solutions could be useful if they are integrated into the overall national plan properly. But you see, when the local solutions, are preferred and they're not, properly meshed into the, the overarching strategy, then oftentimes they are misunderstood and oftentimes they can be abused.
Those who also say that the challenges of security that we are having are products of something. For instance, some have adduced economic reasons, economic downturns or unemployment, for example, as one of the reasons why, people take undue advantage and unleash mayhem here and there.
Yes, you are right in a sense, but you also have to understand that you cannot look at this problem in 2 dimensions. You must look at it in 3D. What we're dealing with is opportunistic. What do we mean by opportunistic? If it comes to Nigeria and finds out that your GDP is not impressive, it finds out that your unemployment is high, what happens is that the terror intelligence always works that into their own narrative. And when they work into their own narrative, they're going to find a way to use it to support the goal towards which they are headed. So in that sense, if we said, oh, okay, the economic downturn is this and that, you are right. But if you, however, now isolate it, and let me tell you why this is very dangerous, because for many years, I was almost amused when I saw one of the former prime ministers of Britain, Tony Blair, when he came to comment on the Nigerian challenge some years ago. He was spouting this economic theory because that is the policy that they have had towards, Nigeria. But the point is, when exactly the same thing happened in his own country in 7/7, there was no mention of any economic challenges. They went straight away to the core of the problem and called it what it was and began to tackle it directly. So in the same vein, Nigeria has to be very careful. Look, you see, in solving the problem that we're looking at, it involves a whole lot of money. Now, that is a big challenge again for us in Nigeria because of corruption. Now, everybody will want to say, oh, the problem is under my purview. It's under the preserve of what I do. Why? Because it attracts a lot of funding. Now, to that effect, we allow that to happen. What will ultimately result is that we will lose the nation. And that's why I'm saying to you that there has to be a central overview that patches all these little bits and pieces and works it into the main narrative.
The time, pardon me, you know, when people listen to some of what you've said over time, over the years, they listen to others who have equally spoken on the same vein, and to them, when those issues make sense, and then they expect the authorities to carry out steps or take actions based on some of those things which they consider that make sense. There's a level at which people will get frustrated when they don't see that. Now we've seen protests in Katsina, particularly about security. We've seen that in some other states where they call for people to help themselves. Now, what level, I mean, how far or close are we from losing it when people say, listen, I've had enough. I don't see the authorities taking actions that I see will save me. For those who are losing families, there's nothing we're going to tell them except they see actions. How far or close do you think we are from losing it or getting it right?
Well, it depends on if you look at a glass and say it's half empty or it is half full. I think we've been on a learning curve. And I did mention something to you earlier on. I said to you that we are going to have to include non-state actors into this loop if we are going to overcome this challenge on behalf of the nation. I think we're getting to a point right now when a lot of people who are influential, who are not necessarily in governance per se, have begun to realize that this problem is our problem, as opposed to a government problem or a military problem or a northern problem or a southern Kaduna problem. It is actually a national problem that is a part of a global problem. And once we get to that point, I would expect, honestly, that people and persons who have the influence will now realize why we need to move using some of the advantages we have as Africans, because there are some advantages we have as Africans in terms of consensus building and opinion molding that have not even come into play at all. For good example, the politics of Nigeria is so acerbic that it's been very difficult to forge any degree of partisanship in terms of facing this challenge. Now, I'm saying to you that from without, we are going to have to put pressure on the political class to slow down their bickering and make sure that we have a united political front against this threat, or else the threat will continue to use even that. And that's why you say sometimes that, why is it that with all the analysis here and there, people say, look, government is not going to just jump up and implement, except, for instance, the media begins to ask the right questions and stays on the right questions, and except opinion molders get to work and put pressure here and there. Now, don't forget that government often is like a locomotive. It's easy for a car or a motorcycle to make a U-turn, but when a locomotive wants to make a U-turn, there are processes. Now, these are things that I have had to settle to accept as realities. I think there are a lot of Nigerians who are very theoretical, who in their minds think they live in another country where people have paid the price and laid the foundation for processes to work. Now, the same challenge that is behind healthcare system is the same challenge behind all these things that we're talking about here. So I'm saying that we have reached a threshold where we are going to have to take responsibility, and we're going to have to put pressure on government with wisdom, not as antagonists, but as stakeholders who have a common future that is invested in whatever government is doing. I believe that that's where we are at right now, and that's a positive step.
Now, interestingly, when you talk about coming together, having non-state actors, a few days ago, the coalition of northern groups came together and they met with leaders of region, southern Kaduna to be specific, leaders and indigents, and they came up with a communique. And I recall during that meeting, one of the speakers was saying, You would have preferred if this were armed robbery, because at least there would be some motive, according to him, rather than having senseless killings. And for him, he didn't quite understand why you would have killings. I mean, what was the motive? Is it to feed yourself? It didn't make sense to him. And you've talked about us, beefing up ourselves, our resolve, our actions, and all. But you also talked about the architecture of thought of the enemy. And it begs the question, what is really at stake here in southern Kaduna specifically that we have these series of attacks? Because I think it's also important, like you said, to understand the architecture of thought of the enemy.
Good. From what you have said, even that inclusion, that comment itself betrays the fact, like what we have said, that this problem was designed to be difficult to diagnose. It was designed specifically to be just that. It was designed in such a way that people often get bewildered. Some say it's political, some say no, it's ethnic, some say it's religious, some say no, it's financial, some say it's economic. And like I said, I don't want analysis paralysis, because we've been through all this many years. And the point now is that now people are going to have to understand that it's a composite. It is that and more than that, and not only that. I mean, look at that comment that came out in the communique, if I can quote you. It betrays the fact that the coming together is yet to realize that you are dealing with a global problem that has a national, regional, and local application. Now, if we understood that, let me put it in a way that, let me break it down, for the layman. I think it was Alfred Nietzsche who said that when somebody watches somebody who is dancing and the person who is observing the dancer cannot hear the music, it looks to the observer that the dancer is not quite all right, is maybe insane. But if he were to listen to the music, he would now be able to understand that all the twists and turns and jerks are syncopated to that music. Now, it's the same thing with this particular problem. It was well designed. And once Nigeria is able to come to the point where we all agree that this is what this is, all of a sudden, we don't want anybody to call those killings senseless anymore. They are not senseless. They are deliberate. They are done in a particular way. And they're not only that, they are designed in such a way that force multipliers help them to even achieve the agenda even further, as long as the people refuse to recognize the root causes, which actually is supremacist behind this whole thing. So really, it is not financial, it is not religious, it is not economic, it is not those bits and parts. It only exploits all that. It is ready to divide a household, it is ready to divide a state. And if, for instance, a state unfortunately has somebody who is not a bridge builder at the helm of affairs, it now makes this matter worse. For I'll say to you that Kaduna State, for instance, we have to be extra careful, because those who are in authority in Kaduna State have to be very sensitive to realize that they have to build bridges and make sure that the people are still talking, bonding, coming together, so that the problem can be solved. Now, there are utterances and there are responses that people in authority can make that actually deepen the problem, whether knowingly or unknowingly. So these are things that are additives. But what is most important is the central overarching document that we are waiting for.
And by extension, as you wrap up, it suggests from what you've said is that we need to stop looking at this problem from our own prism, or better still, from a keyhole. We need to see the big picture such that we can approach it as such. Is that right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Once we can do that, we would realize that whoever feels he's safe, who sits in Lagos and says that, oh, it was in Niger State the bombing went on, that person will be quickly educated to find out that the person who did the bombing in Niger State actually traveled out of Lagos 3 days before it to go to Niger to go and carry out the act. So that way there will be a joint, responsibility across the entire nation. Nigeria has what it takes to beat this problem. we can do it. We can do it. It's just that we need to wake up on time, and we need to create the necessary synergy and put those 4 things into place. And honestly, nothing can withstand us when we're united and determined.
A very fine place to leave it. We do thank you very much indeed, Reverend Ladi Thompson, Strategic Security Researcher and Consultant. Thank you for talking to us today.